Hello students, in this module I'll be talking about hydrophily or water pollination, and I will also talk about hypohydrophily. So look, listen and learn. Now what you see behind me is a beautiful image, and what you see up there is a burst of pollen, this time in water, right? So the transfer of pollen grain through agency of water is also called as hydrophily. The word hydro we obviously know means water, and the word phily we now know also means attracting or loving. And of course the plants that show hydrophily are called as hydrophilous plants. Yes? Now remember, some aquatic plants make excellent use of water for their pollination, right? Now let us see what should be some of the floral adaptations we need for hydrophily. Now these adaptations are very similar to anemophily or wind pollination. You will see that. Number one, flowers are mostly unisexual. Flowers are very small. Flowers are inconspicuous. They basically are not brightly colored. They show no nectar formation or they show no fragrance. So if you see these characteristics or adaptations, they are pretty much similar to anemophily, right? Moving on. Now if I look at the floral parts, especially the pollen grains and other floral parts are unwettable because they are covered by a layer of mucilage. And imagine, these plants have to always be in water, so they better have parts that are unwettable, right? And remember, the specific gravity of pollen grain is controlled by formation of one or more starch grains within the pollen grain, because this will help in proper floating of the pollen either above or right below the surface of water. Is that okay? And finally, if you try to look at the carpel, or if you try to look at the stigma is long and it is very sticky, because remember, these pollens are in water, so they better not get run away. So the stigma has to be sticky, so when the pollen sticks on them, it makes sure that fertilization happens. Does that make sense? Moving on. Now let us see that hydrophily is of how many types. Now hydrophily is further of two basic types, right? Look at this picture here. What I've shown you here is a body of water. Now if my pollen grains are getting transferred from anther to the stigma below the surface of water, the phenomena will be called as hypohydrophily. Hypo meaning below. And then if my pollen grain is getting transferred from anther to stigma above water or on the surface of water, then the process is called as epihydrophily. Epi meaning above or on the surface. Does that make sense? With this, let us see what is so special about hypohydrophily. Once again, I've shown you the same body of water. Is that okay? Once again, I've taken the pollen from the anther and I've transferred it onto the stigma. Where is it happening? It is happening below the surface of water. So when the pollen is getting transferred below the surface of water, the phenomena is called as hypohydrophily. Hypo meaning below, hydro meaning water, and phily meaning attracting. Does that make sense? Now, moving on. You should know that hydrophytes that show hypohydrophily will usually bear submerged female flowers, because remember, all the action has to undergo below the surface of water. So the flowers must be submerged, right? Moving on. Let us see something more about hypohydrophily. Remember that the plants will produce needle-like pollen grain which will lack exine. See, they don't have to have any spiny exine because it doesn't have to stick to any biotic agent. So they can lack exine. Does that make sense? And then you should also know that the pollen will bear the same specific gravity as that of water, right? Therefore, they can float below water surface. Does that make sense? And then what will happen? This pollen, with the help of water, will move towards that sticky stigma. Does that make sense? And when it does, you should know that the pollen will come in contact with the stigma and then coil around the stigma and will start germinating and ensure that fertilization will occur. Does that make sense? And you should also know that some examples of hypohydrophyly is an example called as Zostera. Another example is that of a plant by the name of Ceratophyllum, right? Both of these plants you might have seen in aquariums or water tanks. Is that okay? And both these plants will show hypohydrophyly. So in this module, I've talked about hydrophyly or water pollination, and I've also talked about hypohydrophyly. In the next module, I'll obviously talk about epihydrophyly, how pollination takes place on the surface of water. Till then, thank you and take care.